What do you say to the mother who held her dying child in her arms? What do you tell the man who watched his future unravel in a hospital room? How do you speak of God's goodness to someone who has only ever known pain? These are not abstract questions. They are not theological puzzles to be solved in the safety of a classroom. They are the cries of a soul standing on the edge of despair. And whether we speak it aloud or keep it buried in silence, every human heart has asked, if God is good, why is there so much suffering? Some walk away from faith because of this question. Others hold on tightly with trembling hands because in suffering they've found something sacred. Today, we don't come with easy answers. We come with honesty. We come with reason. And more than that, we come with hope. A hope not grounded in blind optimism, but in the story of a God who did not stay distant from pain, but entered into it. This is not just a question for philosophers, it is a question for all of us. Because sooner or later, suffering will knock on every door, and what we believe about God will shape how we survive the storm. When we ask whether a good God can allow suffering, one of the most important distinctions to make is between moral evil and natural evil. These two categories of suffering come from fundamentally different sources, and unless we understand them, our response to the question will lack depth and clarity. Moral evil refers to the suffering that results from human decisions. Things like war, murder, betrayal, theft, and injustice. These are not acts of nature, but of the will. A dictator orders the execution of thousands. A man abandons his family. A child is trafficked. All of these are tragedies born not from creation, but from the corruption of the human heart. The existence of moral evil, then, is intimately tied to the gift of human freedom. God, in creating humanity with free will, made love possible, but in doing so, he also made evil possible. Without the ability to choose, love would be programmed, not pure. A robot can be made to mimic affection, but it cannot choose loyalty. In the same way, a world without the possibility of evil would also be a world without genuine virtue. Every act of kindness, sacrifice, or forgiveness presupposes the capacity to do otherwise. And yet, it is precisely in this capacity to choose wrongly that moral evil finds its entry point. The suffering we see at the hands of humans is not a flaw in God's character, but in ours. God did not create evil, he created freedom. And we, in exercising that freedom selfishly, have sown the seeds of moral suffering. Natural evil, on the other hand, involves suffering that arises not from human choice, but from the world itself. Earthquakes, hurricanes, diseases, and famines. This type of suffering often feels more confusing because there's no one to blame, no clear moral failure behind the pain. Yet even here, deeper questions arise. Is nature broken because humanity is broken? Is the created order groaning under the weight of human sin, as some ancient texts suggest? Or could it be that in a world of real laws, physical, biological, environmental, such events are inevitable in a system that also allows for beauty, growth, and life? Imagine asking for a world where fire warms you but never burns you, where gravity holds you to the ground but never causes a fall. Such a world cannot exist without contradiction. A consistent universe comes with risks. Volcanoes create fertile soil but can erupt with devastation. Rivers water crops but can flood villages. Cells reproduce to sustain life, but when corrupted, they become cancerous. Even in these so-called natural evils, there is complexity. For every moment of destruction, there is the potential for reflection, resilience, and reordering. Suffering in nature does not imply divine cruelty. It reveals a system designed with the potential for both flourishing and fragility. Both moral and natural evil, therefore, must be seen not as twin accusations against God's goodness, but as invitations to wrestle with the deeper nature of reality, human freedom, and divine purpose. To understand how a good God could allow suffering, we must consider the nature of love and freedom. Love, if it is to be meaningful, must be freely given. It cannot be coerced or programmed. A world in which creatures are capable of genuine love must be a world where those creatures have the freedom to choose not to love. This capacity to choose, what we call free will, is both a gift and a great risk. For in granting humanity freedom, God allowed for the possibility that people might choose evil over good, selfishness over selflessness, hatred over love. This is not a flaw in the gift of freedom, but a necessary consequence of its authenticity. Imagine a parent who wants their child to love them. The parent could program the child to say, "I love you" at every moment, but it would be meaningless. The words would be mechanical, void of sincerity or sacrifice. True love is only expressed when one has the option to reject, to walk away, to withhold. It is this very freedom that gives love its weight. And yet, in that same freedom lies the possibility of great harm. The person who is free to embrace you is also free to betray you. The friend who can stand by you is also free to abandon you. The human will, unbound by force, can choose either compassion or cruelty. God could have made a world without the possibility of suffering by removing the freedom to choose, but such a world would be one without dignity, without responsibility, without moral meaning. We would be automatons, performing goodness because there was no other alternative. But in his desire for a relationship with creatures made in his image, God chose to endow humanity with the capacity to love and reason, and therefore to rebel. The very things that make human life rich and meaningful are the things that make suffering possible. The murderer who destroys life, the thief who wounds a family, the liar who betrays trust, all are exercising a misused freedom. And yet, without that freedom, there would be no such thing as loyalty, honor, or mercy. Even more, the noblest qualities we admire in others, courage, sacrifice, forgiveness, exist precisely because suffering is possible. One cannot be brave unless there is danger. One cannot forgive unless there has been pain. One cannot lay down one's life unless life is under threat. So in a paradoxical way, the very existence of suffering also opens the door to virtues that would not otherwise exist. The human story, full of struggle and trial, is also full of perseverance and redemption. And at the heart of it is a God who values real love over robotic obedience, a God who invites rather than imposes, and who bears the cost of that freedom alongside us. When we speak of a good God allowing suffering, the conversation must include the possibility that a sovereign God can permit pain in order to accomplish a greater good. This does not suggest that suffering is good in itself, but that within the fabric of life, pain can serve a deeper and more redemptive purpose than we often recognize. A child undergoing surgery may cry out in confusion and fear, but the parent stands by, allowing it to happen, not out of cruelty, but because healing lies on the other side of the pain. The temporary agony serves a greater purpose the child cannot yet understand. In much the same way, human suffering often holds within it the seeds of transformation. Consider how many of the most profound human virtues are shaped and formed in the furnace of affliction. Patience grows where there is waiting. Courage emerges where fear is present. Compassion deepens through the experience of loss. These are not lessons learned in comfort, but in crisis. The person who has never suffered may have an easy life, but they rarely possess the depth of character found in those who have walked through the valleys. There are treasures buried in darkness, wisdom grown in sorrow, and a kind of empathy that only pain can cultivate. From a divine perspective, the narrative of suffering may be like a tapestry viewed from the back. Knots, loose ends, tangled threads. It is only when seen from the other side that the picture begins to make sense. We, bound by time and limited understanding, often see only fragments of the whole. We ask why a loved one was lost, why a dream was crushed, why injustice seemed to win. But to a sovereign God, whose vision is not blurred by time, these painful pieces are part of a larger and more beautiful design. The good he seeks is not always comfort, but conformity to the image of goodness itself. Suffering, then, is not senseless. It is at times the tool of shaping. There are also countless stories of lives that were forever changed by what first appeared to be tragedy. A person struck down by illness discovers a deeper purpose. A family fractured by loss grows in unity and faith. A society shaken by disaster unites to rebuild with renewed strength. In each of these, suffering did not have the final word. Instead, it became the soil from which something unexpected grew. The sovereignty of God means that even when evil is present, it cannot ultimately triumph. What others intend for harm, God can repurpose for healing. What appears to be the end may in fact be the beginning of a new story. This greater good is not always visible in the moment, and sometimes not even in this lifetime. But the trust in a God who sees beyond the immediate, who works through suffering rather than apart from it, offers a hope that pain is not wasted. It is not the absence of goodness, but the birthplace of it. Suffering has a peculiar way of exposing the deeper layers of the human heart. It is often said that pain is a mirror. It reveals what lies within us, and also a megaphone, shouting truths we might otherwise ignore. In times of ease, we can maintain illusions about our self-sufficiency, our control over life, or even our own virtue. But suffering interrupts that illusion. It tears through the noise of comfort and forces us to confront questions we would rather avoid. It compels us to ask what truly matters, who we are at our core, and where our trust ultimately lies. When a person experiences physical pain, it signals that something is wrong in the body. A broken bone, a failing organ, an infection. These all announce themselves through pain. Without that signal, the body would continue to deteriorate silently. Pain, though unwanted, is a necessary warning. In the same way, suffering in the emotional, moral, or spiritual realms often alerts us to a kind of internal decay. It unmasks the pride we've harbored, the idols we've trusted, or the emptiness we've tried to fill with temporary pleasures. It may not feel like mercy, but in exposing what is broken, pain becomes a path to healing. People rarely seek God when everything is going according to plan. Comfort often breeds complacency. But in the moments when life falls apart, when death knocks, when betrayal cuts deep, when plans shatter, we find ourselves reaching for something greater than ourselves. Suffering creates a space where the illusion of control is stripped away, and we are left with a raw dependence on grace. In that space, many discover a deeper relationship with the divine than they ever knew in seasons of ease. It is not that God is absent in good times, but that we are often deaf to Him when our ears are filled with our own songs of success. There is something about pain that humbles us. It reminds us that we are not gods. It levels us. It makes the rich man and the poor man equal at the graveside, the powerful and the weak equal in the face of illness. It causes us to listen to others' stories more deeply, to empathize more sincerely, and to see our shared humanity more clearly. A heart that has been broken is often more open to the needs of others. A person who has known sorrow can walk with another in their grief with authenticity and care. Through pain, the soul can become more tender, not harder. The great paradox of suffering is that it both wounds and awakens. It bruises the body but awakens the spirit. It shatters assumptions but stirs deeper truths. It may not answer every philosophical question, but it does pose a spiritual one. Will we let this pain drive us to despair, or drive us to seek something beyond ourselves? As then becomes not merely a problem to solve, but a voice that calls us back to the one who can redeem it. One of the most profound responses to the question of suffering is not found in abstract philosophy, but in the incarnation and crucifixion. The claim that God took on human flesh and entered into our pain is not merely a theological concept. It is the very center of the Christian narrative. At the heart of this story is not a God who watches from a distance, untouched by human agony, but one who steps into it, embraces it, and bears it. In the person of Christ, God becomes acquainted with grief, sorrow, betrayal, hunger, loneliness, and even death. He does not send a messenger to explain suffering. He comes himself and suffers with us and for us. The cross stands as the greatest paradox of history, the place where perfect innocence met perfect injustice. Jesus, who committed no wrong, was tortured, mocked, and crucified, executed by the very people he came to redeem. If ever there was a moment that seemed to contradict the goodness of God, it was there. And yet, that moment became the pivot of redemption. The greatest act of evil became the means through which the greatest good was achieved. In the suffering of Christ, evil was not ignored but confronted. Justice was not bypassed but fulfilled. Mercy was not denied but magnified. The fact that God would willingly subject himself to suffering changes the tone of every other experience of pain. It means that when we suffer, we do not cry out into a void. We cry out to a God who has felt the whip, the nails, the abandonment, the agony. He does not observe our pain from a safe distance. He enters it. He knows what it is to weep at a grave, to be betrayed by a friend, to plead in the darkness of Gethsemane. This is not theoretical knowledge. This is experiential solidarity. In every moment of human pain, there is the echo of divine presence. The crucifixion does not remove suffering from the world, but it reframes it. It says that suffering is not the end of the story. It reveals that death itself can be overcome, that what seems like defeat can be the doorway to victory. The resurrection that followed the cross was not simply a display of power. It was the declaration that suffering, no matter how deep, does not get the final word. God took the worst of what the world could offer and turned it into the means of salvation. This changes how we view our own suffering, not as something that separates us from God, but as something in which God is present. For those who wonder if God is indifferent to their pain, the cross is the eternal answer. He is not. He has been there. He is there still. And because of that, even the darkest night carries the promise of dawn. The hands that were pierced for us are the same hands that now hold us in our brokenness. One of the most powerful responses to the question of suffering lies in the hope and reality of eternity. If this life were all there is, if the span of human existence ended at the grave, then the pain, injustice, and heartbreak experienced on earth would indeed seem cruel and meaningless. A child dying of hunger, a woman enduring lifelong abuse, or a man struck down by illness at his prime. If their stories end there, then suffering wins. But if life continues beyond death, if we are eternal beings made not just for time but for eternity, then suffering is not the final word. It becomes instead a part of a larger and unfolding narrative that reaches far beyond our present understanding. Eternity shifts the way we perceive justice. In a world limited to time alone, justice is often delayed, distorted, or denied. The innocent suffer while the wicked prosper. The righteous are sometimes forgotten and the corrupt celebrated. But from an eternal perspective, justice is not confined to the short window of earthly life. There is a coming day promised and certain when every wrong will be addressed, every secret brought to light, every victim vindicated. That doesn't erase the pain of the present, but it reframes it with the assurance that divine justice is not absent, only unfolding in a much wider frame than we now see. When eternity is real, suffering itself gains new purpose. Pain, though terrible, can become part of the preparation for something greater. A person training for a marathon undergoes immense physical strain, not because the pain itself is good, but because of what lies ahead. In the same way, the trials of this life may serve as a refining process for the soul, shaping character, deepening faith, and increasing compassion. The person who suffers often gains an eternal depth that cannot be achieved by comfort alone. These afflictions, though deeply painful, can become tools in the hands of a loving God to prepare us for the glory that lies ahead. Eternity also answers the deep longing within every human heart, the ache for something more, something lasting, something that will finally make sense of the chaos. Every culture, every religion, and every soul bears witness to this longing for permanence, for justice, for peace. It is a hunger that nothing in this world seems able to satisfy. The reality of eternity, however, tells us that we were made for more than this world. That longing is not an illusion, it is a signpost pointing us toward our true home, where God Himself will dwell with His people and where there will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain. The promise of eternity does not trivialize suffering, it dignifies it. It says your pain matters, your tears are seen, and your wounds are not forgotten. It declares that the story is not over, and that the God who walks with you in your suffering will one day restore all things. In eternity, the scars of this life will be swallowed up by the beauty of a redeemed and restored creation. So where does all of this lead us? We began with a question that echoes through every hospital room, every battlefield, every silent night of grief. Can a good God allow suffering? And though we may never fully grasp the weight of that mystery, we can see the outlines of a deeper truth, a truth that tells us God is not absent in our pain. He is not a distant observer of human tragedy. He is the God who created us with freedom, who can bring purpose from our trials, who exposes the heart through suffering, who suffered Himself on the cross, and who promises a future beyond the brokenness of this world. This is not an answer that removes pain, but it gives pain meaning. It is not a theory, but a testimony. It declares that suffering does not have the final word, God does, and that in the hands of a loving and sovereign Creator, even our darkest valleys can lead to redemption. The presence of pain does not cancel the presence of God. It often reveals it more clearly than ever before. In that we find a hope that does not deny the suffering, but transcends it. A hope rooted in eternity, grounded in love, and proven through the cross.